By the time you're watching this, I'll be deep into my second one-day tournament at the Tabletop Tactics Lodge with my Screaming Ravens. This should be releasing just around the time I'm starting my third and final game, so hopefully my opponent doesn't have time to watch this video before I game and discover all of my super special secret tactics. If you are my third opponent watching this right as it comes out, hello. We should get started with setup. Please stop watching this video. I said stop watching. Please stop watching. I'm literally standing in front of you. The least you could do is at least press that button before we start a game. I wanted to talk about the changes to my list since the last tournament, as well as discussing the delicate balancing act between building a competitive and fluffy list for events like this. I was surprised in my last tournament to actually get a positive win rate. My 3 games were all different in how they played out, with my first game being a fairly decisive win, the second being a pretty defensive loss, and the third and final game being a close, scrappy victory. I went through a few iterations before landing on this final army. Some of the changes were tactical, but most were necessary due to not having time to paint or needing to buy units I didn't actually have. But it is a list I'm fairly happy with overall. It's not that different from the first list, with the main core being the same. As much as my competitive side would love to try and get some more meta picks in there to increase my chances of winning, I couldn't move away from 12 Centurions, a Stormraven, and a Dream. Anytime I would try to remove the Stormraven from the list, for example, which is 280 points worth of other potentially very useful units, it just didn't feel like a Screaming Ravens list anymore. And I'd rather lose with my own unique list than win using a more competitive list with tried and tested units, or more likely lose using a more competitive list with tried and tested units, because I haven't tried and tested them myself. These are units that I've practiced with and understood, or at the very least I can just about remember what weapons they have and their stat lines. This is something that you need to consider as well when trying to meta chase or look at the top lists. Do you actually know why those units are in the list? Do you know how to use them? Because I sure don't. I know how to use Centurions. At least some of the time. As we go through the list, let me know in the comments what you think of the list and what you would do with these units in the game. If you could tell me in the next 5 minutes so I can use that information in my final game, that would be fantastic. Don't look at me like that. This is my video. I can use it to cheat if I want to. Would you rather I use the advice from that other video? So what units have been dropped? I've dropped a unit of Incursors with the Phobot Lt, the Lone Operative Jump Captain with Hammer, and the Redemptor Dreadnought. I've also swapped the second Incursor unit for Infiltrators, which is what I wanted to do originally before the Stormraven nerf, but we'll get into that later in the video. Let's start with the easy choices. The Captain with Jump Pack with Ghostweave Cloak is a fun unit, but it's 100 points, which can be more easily replicated elsewhere. And whilst he was paramount to my victory in the last game, I think another unit could have done this job just as well for cheaper and potentially with more flexibility. I was thinking about just dropping the enhancement and having another leader for jump units, but other changes to my list meant that I couldn't really fit him in. The Incursors and Phobot Lt are again just here to free up some points for other units that would fill a similar role and also ones I wanted to try. The move, shoot, move was very nice to have, but again, it's a lot of points invested when that role can be fulfilled in many other ways. I found that these guys either kind of stood on one objective all game or did nothing. And whilst the standard set of Incursors does this job pretty well, I don't find it worth adding in character support for what is meant to be a cheap unit. The most controversial change is the removal of the Redemptor Dreadnought, which I think most people consider one of the better units available to Space Marines, but I've never really been able to get much use out of it. The Plasma is fine, but I have so many other weapons in the list that fit that profile, and the melee isn't as good as the Brutalis, which is part of my Stormraven death drop. It is a lot tankier, but I've always been disappointed in the output of the Redemptor, and that is most likely a skill issue. But it is 210 points, which I could put to other things that more fit how I want to play, and to fill in other gaps that are more beneficial for my army. I mean, I should have really known the whole time that I wasn't going to be using the Redemptor very well. The very first time I used this Redemptor, it did a total of 9 wounds over the entire game. All 9 wounds were to itself. This goes back to not using units just because they're used in a lot of top lists. The Redemptor Dreadnought probably makes sense in these meta lists because it's filling a gap that I already have units for, or I'm just using it wrong. It's probably more likely that. But I shouldn't try and shoehorn in the Redemptor if it just doesn't fit the way I play or the way my list works just because it is good or better than other units that I'm using, or one of the best units in the codex. So that's 445 points saved.
By Grabthar's hammer. What a savings.
How did I spend them? I've added a Judiciar with the Blade driven deep with 3 Bladeguard Veterans, 5 Jump Intercessors, the Incursors to Infiltrator upgrade, and a Ballistus Dreadnought. I've also made a small tweak which may be quite shocking to you if you've watched this channel for a while. No, I haven't removed any Centurions, don't be ridiculous, of course I wouldn't do that. What I've done is transported all of my units to the tournament using my Mag Case 2.0. Okay, I have done something much more interesting, but you'll have to wait until after I've done the sponsor time. The Mag Case 2.0 from tabletopstronghold.com is the best way to transport your minis of any size safely and securely using strong MDF, adjustable trays, and the power of But not only is this the best way to store and display your minis, the Magnets 2.0 is a versatile piece of kit that can be used for a multitude of different things. For example, reaching high up places, baking cookies, miscellaneous wizard activity, emergency survival, over-the-top narrative ad reach, blockading vehicles, self-defense, and streaking. If you want all that and more, there is 30% off right now in their February Frenzy sale on cases and terrain with free shipping to the USA, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and most of the EU. Go to tabletopstronghold.com right now, and thank you once again, Tabletop Stronghold. Links in the description. So what I've actually done is broken up the Shrike bomb a little bit. Instead of a big block of 10 Vanguard veterans, I now have 2 units of 5. Still with Inferno pistols and not using Storm shields because Inferno pistols are cool. But I think that gives me a little bit more width to play with for objectives and targeting isolated units that need killing. The logic for this is that 40 attacks with lethals rapid ingressing safely to get a 1-inch charge is great, but most of the time I'm not actually getting all the models into range. And even then I'm overkilling the targets I point them at. Also, with the Inferno pistols, I'm never getting all 10 in melter range where they can do some serious damage. On top of that, when I do drop the big bomb in, after they've done their damage, they get reduced to doing actions, which is useful, but that's 320 points tied up actioning. By splitting this up, I can have one unit going for this precise strike with Shrike and another that could do some work elsewhere or do actions. I could even start some on the board to get some early actioning in if needed. In some situations, I could even not take Shrike with anyone and have an extra lone operative similar to what the Hammer Jump Captain was doing previously. I've not tested this out, but after using the big 10-man bomb for a few games, I found that it's just a little bit too unwieldy for what I need. Trying to hide this big unit of 10 after they've killed their prey means they get whittled down pretty fast anyway, and having that precision strike unit only be able to act once is not worth 320 points. Now, at this point, would it have been better to reduce these Vanguard veterans to Jump Intercessors to save points and have extra OC because of the Shrike buff? Yes. But I built and painted these guys as Vanguard veterans, and I can't be bothered to try and designate or model the ones with power fists or plasma pistols and communicate that clearly to my opponent so they know what's going on at a glance without having to ask me every time they want to know what model is equipped with what weapons. Also, Vanguard veterans with Infernal pistols are just the coolest thing in the world, so I'm paying the extra points for style, and frankly, I'm okay with it. I do have 5 Jump Pack Intercessors as the Ghostweave Hammer Captain's replacement. Again, this is an extra unit for some objective play, they're fast and they can deep strike, and with being OC2 because of the Shrike buff, it helps to flip some of those objectives later in the game. Have I used these guys effectively any game I played? Only once, and that was against chat, and I won that game regardless, but I still think they are useful. I just need to make better use of them in games that just aren't against Chaos Knights. The blade-driven deep Judiciar with the Bladeguard is an interesting unit. I'd actually really like this to be a 6-strong unit, but I didn't have the other 3 built or painted, and also I would have to remove the Jump Intercessors or something. But even as a 3-strong blob, these guys are really good. Infiltrate is nice to get early positioning, and fights first means that anything coming into them might take some casualties before getting to fight. My plan with this unit is to act as either a roadblock or an objective scoring distraction that forces my opponent's hand and allows me more time to get set with my main force. I've had mixed results so far, but overall positive. Sometimes they die early, but that usually means my opponent has committed something to deal with them, which has allowed me better positioning or put them out of position, or they've been ignored and can freely score points, or they lock something in combat long enough to help me get ahead. This is also just a very cool unit thematically. 4 melee dudes appearing out of nowhere to smash you into the ground with sword and board is very Screaming Ravens. Probably the biggest question mark here in the list is the Ballistus, and realistically I'm only taking this because it's painted and I ran out of time to paint with the Outriders. If you've watched some of my recent battle report things, you'll have seen that I've been using 2 lots of 3 Outriders. Badly. In the game against chat, these Outriders were really nice for point scoring, but I don't know, I just feel like I'm misusing them. I'm definitely misusing them. I'm not really respecting the power of their move blocking, and honestly, I think the list really needs some of that. So this section might be part of a video in a few weeks where I talk about my tournament results, where I cut back to this section to point out that I really missed out on these bikes being in the list. In the games that the Outriders did well, they scored a decent amount of points and soaked up some shooting that would otherwise have hurt my main units. In games they did badly, they were 160 points of dead weight. And if we're going to have a bunch of points tied up in dead weight, I'd rather have a las cannon on it. With the Outriders gone, that gives me the room to swap the Incursors for Infiltrators, which are a nice home objective holder and anti-deep strike unit, and also bring in the Ballistus. I've not had much chance to use the Infiltrators, but in the one game I did use them, I actually used the stratagem A Deadly Prize, and they could reposition them to give that 12-inch anti-deep strike aura to protect my key units. Did it work? Nope. I bugged it up massively, but the idea was there. The Ballistus is good, but similar to the Redemptor, it covers a profile that I have in absolute buckets. Las cannons and high-strength missiles. But it's 80 points cheaper than a Redemptor, and also adds something that I've really been missing since removing the Redemptor, and that's having a target for the Techmarine to buff up consistently. Without the pet Redemptor to take for a walk, my Techmarine usually starts the game by buffing up the Stormraven, hopping in, then dropping back out to repair the mangled pieces of my vehicles that were obliterated during my turn 1 overextension before inevitably being killed by incidental bolter fire after soaking up some massive shots by only rolling 60s to save against those. Having a new pet pet to take for a walk and give the buff to consistently is nice, and it's also a backup unit to the Devastator Centurions if I misposition them, which I very likely will. The issue I have with the Ballistas is that the weapons are not twin-linked. Rerolling wounds is a very strong buff that isn't on many units in the game, so I should expect to not have it, and sometimes failing to wound with the big guns is just inevitable. But I've gotten so used to twin-link that I immediately get annoyed that I can't reroll failed wounds. I mean, look at my list. The Stormraven's Hurricane Bolters, Las Cannon and Multi-Melter, the Brutalis Multi-Melter and Talons, the Devastator Centurions, Las Cannons, the Assault Centurions, everything, Shrike's Belly, all of these things have twin-linked. With the way my dice can be, I really need that safety net. Still, there is some safety with the Ballistas. I do think it's good, and it's something, again, you don't need to use against an Oath of Moment target because it's got good strength on its weapons and can also reroll hits similar to the Devastator Centurions, which means I do have a lot more choice of where I put that Oath of Moment. I think it fits nicely into the list. I think it would probably do better than Outriders until I learn how to use them, so I'm relatively happy. We'll see how it goes. The rest of the list is the same as before. The Stormraven with its Brutalis and Melter Assault Centurion payload can bring swift destruction to whatever it gets close to, especially with the buffed Oath of Moment. The Flamer Assault Centurions are a nice counterpunch threat or Horde Clearer, and if nothing else, a unit that can slowly walk up and down smash something. Shrike Bomb is still doing Shrike things even with only 5 models, and the Devastator Centurions are still the best unit in the entire game. And if I could, I'd have 2 full units of them. You can try and convince me there's a better unit in the game, but you can't because you're wrong. Tactically, the list plays very much the same as before, with the Devastator Centurions as the linchpin unit that wants to be jumping around the board, clearing up big targets. My jump pack units are doing actions, Stormraven Party Bus dropping off Melter Death into the face of the enemy, and the Shrike Bomb ripping key units to shreds without reprisal. But now with a few more of those scoring units and a bit more safety in the backlines. The weaknesses of the list are still the same too. The low model count and losing key units means I slowly bleed out. A lot of the games I play generally get off to a really good start and slowly dwindle as I lose key scoring units and can't touch my opponent's scoring units. But my main opponent has been Chaos Knights, which is a really tough matchup because Steve's list has the opposite strength curve. After the initial clash and I take out a few big knights and he takes out some key units, I'm left with a few weaker jumping units and maybe a Centurion or 2, and he's left with small knights that are hereby known as Battle Doggos because YouTube has a problem with the way I talk. Battle Doggos are tough, fast units that I can take out quite easily if Rampages and Despoilers haven't already killed the things that can take them out. So whilst I usually have good starting momentum, Steve's Knights list doesn't fall off nearly as badly. And that usually means he can win even after a bad start if he's taken out something like my Centurions. I imagine against things that aren't all Knights, my list has a better time. I think my army struggles against a lot of tough armor like Mechanized Guard, Knights and Custodies, but lists that have a balance between armor and troops I'll do okay with. Vanguard Spearhead is still, I think, one of the best attachments with 6 stratagems that are at the very least situationally usable, but at best they are game-winning tricks. They have good enhancements, and the rule that makes it harder for me to lose my key units to shooting to give them time to get into your face is not only awesome competitively, but also extremely fluffy for the Streaming Ravens. I'm very much looking forward to my second tournament at the Lodge and getting the opportunity to meet some awesome people, gaze upon some excellently painted armies, and playing some brilliant games of 40k. I just need to make sure I finish painting the Judiciar in time whilst also making this video, so I should probably get on with that. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and hopefully this video isn't going to age horrendously badly when I go 0-3 at the tournament because I played back-to-back games against 6 Dawn Guard lists. But in any case, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, all the good YouTube stuff, and support this channel by becoming a member or patron like all of this lot. Your support helps secure the future of this channel and gets you access to the super secret supporters club, where we arrange meetups for 40k tournaments to point and laugh at Space Marine players that forgot to bring any Centurions.